One last question. Suppose, Lord Russell, this film were to be looked at by our descendants. What would you think it's worth telling that generation about the life you've lived and the lessons you've learned from it?
The intellectual thing I should want to say to them is this. When you are studying any matter or considering any philosophy, never let yourself be diverted by what you wish to believe, but look only and solely at what are the facts and what is the truth that the facts bear out.
Hey cool worlds, it's David. I'm out here in the sticks this weekend trying to clear my head a little before our Hubble Space Telescope observations come up at the end of this month, which will either confirm or deny the existence, the reality of our exomoon candidate Kepler 1625b I. As the moment of truth has been drawing closer and closer, I've been having some journalists ask me questions on the phone like, are you excited? What's it going to feel like if this is the real thing? And I've even seen some headlines sort of almost implying that I've sort of gambled my entire career on this moment, that this is sort of the moment of truth for everything I've done over the last few years. Now I get why people ask these sort of questions, it makes for a great story, but clearly the language being used here has the power to influence and thus cloud a scientist's objectivity. For example, this could trigger anxiety in the scientist and make them think, I have to succeed, else I will be considered a failure by my peers. Or on the other hand, they might start dreaming of all the potential accolades they might receive upon a successful observation. And in either case, clearly, if you start thinking this way as a scientist, you're going to become emotionally invested in a specific outcome for the experiment before you even conducted the experiment. In other words, you've lost your objectivity. If you could get the answer you wanted before you'd even conducted the experiment, that wouldn't be science. Science doesn't work that way. And in fact, neither does life. Now, of course, my situation is not unique. There are many, many scientists, and essentially we have been tasked to search out for objective truths. But at the same time, we have to accept that we are emotional human beings living in a society which rewards success and ultimately penalizes failure. A scientist who has been influenced by the dream of success or believes that a certain outcome is preferable and more aligned to their way of thinking about the universe is in danger at a conscious or even an unconscious level of producing a biased analysis. In the worst case, a flawed interpretational analysis can divert many of the scientists and research funding towards what might be a completely wild goose chase of research. In other words, lots of people start researching something that just doesn't lead anywhere because it was all off the back of a flawed claim in the first place. Now that's obviously not the best way for science to operate. So, as scientists, we want to be completely objective. But how do we do that? How can we be objective scientists? It sounds paradoxical, but I think the first step to becoming more objective is to accept the fact that you will never be truly objective. Like an island on a stormy ocean, you can swim towards it against those strong currents of emotion, but you will never really reach this island of pure truth and objectivity. If a human being could ever exist in a state where they were objective about everything all the time, then they would be infallible. And it's a delusion to pretend that any of us can ever be such a thing. I think it's far better to just accept our nature as flawed, biased human beings. And thus, whenever you are working on something that you really want to be true, and you start to see results which point in that direction, those are the times to apply extra skepticism in your line of inquiry. Because after all, you are biased and you want that to be the result. In other words, rather than trying to pretend that we don't have any emotions as scientists, we should listen even more carefully to them than a normal person. And when we hear that familiar knock on the door of an emotional bias, those are the times that we need to listen to that and work correctively against it. I've certainly felt this roller coaster of emotions in my own work before, and actually this isn't our first exomoon candidate. I remember a few years back when I was at Harvard, we thought we had this amazing candidate. And I was so excited about it that I had to leave the office and go for a walk. And I went to Fresh Pond, which is near Cambridge. And I sat on a bench and I remember thinking to myself, this could be it. This could be the one. My heart was racing and I started dreaming of potentially how we would present it to the press, the accolades that my team would receive, the recognition that I finally might get for this long effort of searching for exomoons. And then a part of me, on the other hand, said, well, what if I'm wrong? What if this thing isn't real? And I felt like a twist in my stomach, a knot and a deep sense of discomfort, and almost, physically sick at the thought of this. After all, if it wasn't real, all of those glory-filled fantasies would, evaporate, and I'd be left here on this bench again with nothing. And when I reflected on how emotionally invested I had become in this candidate at this point in time, I recognized that I was in danger of tricking myself here, that I might be seeing a mirage on the horizon that wasn't really true. So that day I went back to the office and I devised a whole bunch of new tests to figure out if this thing was real or not, things we'd never even used on previous candidates. And ultimately, this candidate did fail one of those tests, and the rest is history. I think because I've walked this precipice of emotion before, multiple times before with previous candidates, I don't actually feel as emotionally invested with Kepler 1625bi as I have done in the past. I think maybe I've sort of grown this thick leather scar tissue skin to such feelings at this point. So I'm definitely not quite as emotionally charged as I was with previous candidates. But at the same time, to pretend that I'm not going to want this thing to be real when the data first comes down and I first look at that light curve is to kid oneself. And there's nothing you can really do about that except to acknowledge it and to work correctively against such biases. But I want to point out briefly that there is actually a danger of going too far, of overcorrecting and just being skeptical of everything that you're ever presented with. And obviously, if you're just skeptical of everything, then that is not being objective either. Some things are true. And I worry about this a lot with exomoons too, because I've seen so many candidates evaporate in the past that maybe I'm just being overly skeptical now, overzealous in my skepticism. And of course, that's very dangerous because maybe I would miss a real exomoon that popped out in the data and I would just brush over it saying, no, trust me, I've seen this before, it's not real, even though it is the real thing, and I'm just being overly skeptical. You end up in the state where you basically tricked yourself into thinking that a false negative is better than a false positive. And actually, if you're trying to be objective, neither of those states is desirable, because neither of them is the truth. But I think perhaps, again, probably the best weapon we have at our disposal as scientists to try and adjust for this possibility of overcorrecting is self-reflection of our own internal biases. Paradoxically, a scientist is a person who is trying to seek the truth, yet is themselves a biased measuring instrument. So when the data comes down at the end of this month, I can't hand on heart promise you that I will be a perfect, infallible, flawless human being in looking at that data. Myself, and indeed the rest of my team, have to, accept that we want this outcome to be true, as I know many of you do as well. All I can promise you is that we will be very thoughtful about our own internal biases that could potentially affect our inferences, and we will try to correct for them. And thus, all we can promise you is the answer that you deserve, and not necessarily the answer you want. In the months ahead, as we get this data and we start to look at it, I'll try to do some stuff on the channel here to tell you about how it's going and whether we think we have at least sufficient data to give a verdict. And hopefully, eventually, when we do have a verdict either way, hopefully, we will tell you about it here first on this channel. So if you want to hear updates about this exomoon candidate and, of course, all the other science coming out of the Course Lab, then do make sure you click the subscribe button down below. Thanks for watching. Let me know if you have any stories or personal anecdotes about how hard it has been for you to be objective about things in the past. Really want to hear your thoughts about this. And until the next time, stay thoughtful and stay curious.